everyone. Thanks for joining us on our very first podcast. These NakiNoku Startup Life podcasts are focused on the startup food entrepreneur experience. NakiNoku is a platform for samples of packaged food like barbecue sauce, hot sauce, spice rubs, so you can taste before you buy, reducing food waste. Our premise is that consumers want to connect with the smaller startup brands and founders to buy on values and to discover new flavors in a sustainable way. But as a packaged food industry, we've shut out these smaller founders who are often minority and women-owned from the digital sampling experience due to a variety of factors like cost, minimum quantities, and complexity. We found that as we connect with these brands and their founders, we're building friendships and a sense of community. So we want to share some of that with the world, with you, our community of food explorers. For our very first podcast, given it is International Women's Day and Women's History Month, I thought it would be awesome to feature Merlys Thomas, my co-founder, wife, and our chief tasting officer. Merly has a very unique background and brings an interesting perspective to the table, and her taste buds shape our business. Tasting food is kind of like taking a photograph. Some people just have a natural gift for framing a photograph in the same way. Merly has a natural gift for tasting flavors and foods. I'm a techie and I can figure out how to package food safely, but when it comes to tasting food flavors, Merly is the naturally gifted one. Merly, do you want to tell the nice people a little bit about yourself, your background, kind of your story so far?
Sure. Thanks for having me on your very first podcast.
Our first podcast.
Our first podcast. Thank you. Describe our journey. Wow. It's not often that I actually get to sit down, stop, and think through, I guess, nearly the last decade. We've been married for 11 years, and I think all things food have been the center of a lot of things from like day one of our relationship. And so, and I think like connecting to just the opportunity to use food as a way to meet people, understand different cultures. We got started with life outside of the US, actually, as a couple together. And our first adventure was in New Zealand, where we spent a year and just learning, how different, food is grown, how it's produced, how it's manufactured, and how it's appreciated in a completely different culture than what the both of us had grown up and been around. And from there, we continue the adventure and the journey into Malaysia and Singapore, and just getting that exposure to Southeast Asia, the culture, the people, again, the food, and just how that all, brings everyone together. And so that was the start.
Yeah, I think that's the start of our food adventures. But could you share with us kind of your journey in career? Because I don't think you intended to do food when you graduated from school. So do you want to share with us a little bit about how you ended up in sort of that industry and where you come from?
Sure. Thinking back, I can definitely say it has not been a linear career path for me. I have a master's in public health. So over 15 years ago, when I was wrapping up graduate school, I'm completely passionate about multiple areas of public health, research, women's health, and the role of nutrition and food and how that ties into our everyday living. And I really thought that's the path that I was going to be in for many years to come. And faith is a big role, in our family and in our marriage. And I always, believe that that God had a purpose for why we actually got a chance to pivot from that, or why I did. And so moving away temporarily from the public health field and exploring entrepreneurship because as we lived overseas, I had a chance to pursue an MBA with a focus in entrepreneurship. And I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with this background, with this newly minted degree, once I eventually came back home to the US. And so I spent quite a bit of time while I was nearing the end of my MBA degree trying to figure out how this is going to add value to my career. And I can't say that the answers came to me immediately. It took nearly a year of exploration during the time that we were in Singapore, and I fell in love with the country and with some amazing friendships that we had made there, and the networks that we had started to build out. And that kind of got us started into thinking about our very first food focused business, and did a lot of market research during the time that we were there.
Yeah, and going back to public health, I think it's very important that whatever we do, we talk about business with purpose, that we ultimately add to the world, and it's not just about making money. It's not just about a livelihood, which it's important too. Obviously, we want to make money. We are a business, but it's important that ultimately we have a positive impact on the world. And I think one of the key examples of that was when we were at the latest Black History Month. There was a health and wellness fair, and here we are selling barbecue sauce, and it seems incongruous that we're not selling, sampling barbecue sauces. It seems incongruous, but barbecue sauce and other sauces have gotten a bad rep because, generally speaking, the ones that you find that are made by large companies are often full of sugar and high fructose corn syrup, right? And finding and exposing people to brands that are proud of what they do, are looking to have a positive impact on the world, and are they have such history and such values. I think that's important to us as a business and as a brand, and especially now that you are back in the public health arena, I think it's important that we be proud of the business that we build. We be proud of the things that we do, and similarly, when you talk to, because I think that's also, observing your life, you've often been very strong on mentorship and training the next generation and strengthening them in whether it's doing business or whatever they might be. Do you have any advice for maybe a young brand founder or someone who is heading out into the field with an expectation that this is what the field and their future career is going to look like, and then the twists and turns that come along the way?
Sure. Well, I think definitely one piece I would say is that, you take stock of where you are in life. I'm a person, and Tony, this, that I think about life in seasons, right? And so when you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, it all looks different, right? And so I think what you're able to envision and achieve in your 20s looks a lot different than when you're in your 30s. And so I think for many founders that are in their early years of getting an idea and running with it, don't feel like you need to conquer like 2 decades of experience and successes and all that within the first like 3 years of starting your business, right? So take things in stride, understand what it is that you can accomplish during this particular season of your life, and from the beginning always surround yourself with strong mentorship, and that doesn't have to be like 15 to 20 people necessarily. It's not necessarily in the number, but it's in the quality of the people that you surround yourself with that can give you solid, business advice, and also solid life advice, right? I think the combination of the two really make a big impact in the way that you then continue and build on the vision for the next set of years for your business.
Yeah, just to linger on that for a moment, I think that's a big misunderstanding when people get into business for the first time, that somehow business advice and life advice are two separate categories. But I think we've found that, surrounding yourself with a good community, but also understanding that your life impacts your business, and you have to give yourself grace in all those seasons of life. Like, we'll probably talk about it in a future podcast about our experiences with our first business, which was the Thai curry sauce business, Serangoon Market, which we loved. We built it from scratch. It was our handiwork, but at the same time, we're going through a really tough season of life, and that really impacted the business as well. And I think that's something that's very important to find mentors who don't just speak to the business side, but also speak into your life about how how to be a better person, because that's going to impact. If you're happy and you're strong and you're feeling confident, that's going to impact your business. I see that difference every day in our current business versus our old business. We're excited about it. Even we're going through a bit of a valley right now, but we have this confidence and the strength that we'll be able to pull through it, because I think we're in a better season of life. So yeah, I think that the focus on mental health these days, I think, is very, very important to help people to understand their journey, to give themselves grace. Like, I just saw a tweet recently about someone saying, you may not have reached all the milestones that's expected of you from society. In our context, being Indian, oftentimes it's people get married early in life and in their 20s, and we got married when we were 30. And just giving yourself grace to understand that things may be different for you than what's expected of you. I think it's very important, especially with International Women's Day, because I feel like that's a tough component, which is there's a lot of expectations from society on women, whether it's in business or in life as a whole. So anything else? I mean, we are coming to the end of our time for this first podcast. I hope we'll be able to dive more into first business, kind of like all that meant. I think a lot of people haven't talked too much about doing business with family, right? Like, as a husband and
touchy subject.
It is a touchy subject. But as a couple, the stresses that it brings into your marriage. I was speaking to someone just this weekend about that at a marriage conference, about how you bring all those stresses into your marriage, and if you don't learn to deal with those things, it can be a huge stress on the marriage, and that impacts children as well, and the future generation. So I think that's a part that hasn't been talked about a lot. I think a lot of stuff around startup founders is kind of focused on the younger crowd, and that's not a bad thing. It's absolutely needed, but also I think there may be a space to talk about people in their 30s, in their 40s.
Yeah, I think the term startup sometimes automatically gets equated to, oh, you must be in your 20s.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that was definitely not true for the both of us. And so they were, again, it brings me back to my favorite word, seasons. Seasons in life, because we were experiencing different seasons of growth in our marriage at the same time, while we were exploring entrepreneurship together for the first time. So a lot of firsts happening at the same time. And so, yes, I think in a future podcast, I think definitely dive into, why we are a purpose-driven business, and, what are some of those lessons learned from the first time around,
Right.
And hopefully we can build on it.
Yeah, and as we close, just to dive a little bit more into your career, after we closed that first business, I loved what you said about your next job, which was as a small business development center director, the SBDC director for a very large incubator downtown. And you used to joke that you basically had a job telling people not to do what we did before.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So I think those learnings, it's great that we went through it, or it didn't feel great at the time, but I think it really made us stronger, made our marriage stronger, made us stronger as a whole, which is why I think we don't panic right now when it comes to the business. And let's say things aren't flying off the shelf or whatever, it is still, this too shall pass. So I think it's important that we pass that on. So for those of you who are listening, who have who have a depth of experience in whatever field it may be, or whether it's entrepreneurship. I'd encourage you to go and find ways to invest that back into the next generation, to the community, rather than just keeping those learnings for yourself. So I hope that we'll be able to also meet some of our founders in future podcasts as well. They are incredibly interesting, awesome people, and I'd love to share their stories with you all as well. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, and thank you, Merly. I think it's very important that people understand the face behind the name, right? And so Merly writes, if you feel like there's two different voices on our social media, sometimes it's because either Merly does it or I do it. But yes, we're deeply involved in the business, and we believe in this business. So I hope you'll join us for the journey. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next